Mark Collins thought he had it all, a loving wife, 2 beautiful children, and a life built on trust and devotion. But his world shatters when he discovers that Julia, his wife of 12 years, has been carrying on a secret affair with her boss, Adam, for over a decade. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Mark confronts the betrayal, determined to protect his children and reclaim his dignity. As divorce proceedings begin, Mark struggles with the emotional fallout of the lies that unraveled his marriage. Julia, desperate to salvage what's left, pleads for forgiveness, but Mark's resolve remains firm, until tragedy strikes. A sudden, heartbreaking accident takes Julia's life, leaving Mark to navigate his grief, guilt, and lingering questions about the woman he once loved. In this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and redemption, Mark faces the ultimate test of resilience as he learns that healing comes not from revenge, but from finding strength in the most unexpected places. The story explores the fragile bonds of family, the weight of forgiveness, and the enduring power of love, even when it seems broken beyond repair. I always thought my marriage was unshakable. Julia and I had built a life together over 12 years, 2 beautiful children, a comfortable home, and what I believed was a solid partnership. She had been the love of my life, someone I admired and respected. We laughed, planned our future, and navigated life's ups and downs with what I thought was mutual commitment. But hindsight is a cruel teacher. It reveals the cracks you were too blind or too naive to see. Things began to change subtly, almost imperceptibly. Julia had always been busy with work, especially after her promotion at the company where she'd been a star employee. Her boss, Adam Hawkins, was someone she often mentioned, always with a tone of admiration. I never gave it much thought, it wasn't unusual for her to talk about work. But looking back, I now see the pattern, how his name would surface more frequently in conversations, her tone shifting from casual to something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge at the time. The first real clue came during what I now call the weekend of discomfort. Julia had a business trip, a last-minute weekend getaway that seemed rushed and poorly planned. She brushed off my questions about the sudden nature of the trip, claiming it was an emergency client meeting. But as she packed her bag, something about her demeanor nagged at me. Her excitement felt misplaced, almost like she was heading out on an adventure rather than a work obligation. I dismissed the thought, telling myself I was imagining things. But my gut knew better. While she was gone, I found myself restless, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. I went about my weekend with the kids, trying to distract myself with their laughter and activities. But in the quiet moments, the unease crept back in, gnawing at my thoughts like a persistent whisper I couldn't ignore. The moment everything began to unravel came in the form of an unassuming envelope, delivered to my office by a courier who left without a word. I opened it, expecting a routine document, but inside was something entirely different, a series of photographs, a detailed report, and a handwritten note that simply read, "You deserve to know the truth." The photos were damning. Julia and Adam, her boss, together in intimate moments, at restaurants, in hotels, even on trips I thought she had taken alone. The report detailed years of deception, beginning shortly after our daughter Emma was born. My hands trembled as I read about clandestine meetings, business trips that were nothing of the sort, and a carefully crafted facade that had hidden this betrayal for over a decade. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal, it was the sheer effort she had put into maintaining the lie. She had used every ounce of her charm and cunning to keep me in the dark, to ensure I never questioned her late nights, her weekend trips, or her frequent mentions of Adam. And I had played right into her hands, trusting her without hesitation, believing her excuses because I wanted to see the best in her. I couldn't bring myself to confront her right away. The anger was there, hot and raw, but so was the heartbreak. How do you face someone you love, knowing they've been lying to you for years? How do you hold on to any sense of normalcy when your entire foundation has been ripped away? Instead of reacting impulsively, I decided to gather more information. I hired a private investigator to verify the details in the report, hoping against hope that there had been some mistake. But the investigator's findings only confirmed what I already knew. Julia's affair with Adam had been going on for 12 years. 12 years of deception, right under my nose. The investigator handed me more evidence, a timeline of her trips, receipts from hotels and restaurants, and even a video. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. The thought of seeing her with him was too much to bear. Instead, I sat in my car, staring at the folder, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me like a suffocating blanket. I thought about the times I had stayed up late, waiting for her to come home, wondering why she was so distant. I thought about the moments when she had laughed with me, kissed me, held me close, all while carrying this secret. I thought about our children, Emma and Daniel, and how this would affect them if they ever found out. The betrayal wasn't just about her infidelity, it was about the life we had built, the memories we had shared, and the future I thought we were creating together. It was about the lies she had told not just to me, but to herself, to our children, and to everyone who believed we were the perfect family. For days, I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine while the evidence of her betrayal burned a hole in my soul. I didn't eat much, barely slept, and avoided her as much as I could. When she asked if something was wrong, I forced a smile and said I was just stressed from work. The truth was too big, too overwhelming to confront just yet. I knew I needed a plan. Confronting Julia without a clear strategy would only give her the chance to spin more lies, to manipulate the situation to her advantage. I needed to be prepared, to have every piece of evidence lined up so that when the time came, she couldn't talk her way out of it. The hardest part was acting normal around the kids. Emma and Daniel were my anchors, the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Their innocence, their laughter, their love, they were the reasons I couldn't let this destroy me. I owed it to them to handle this carefully, to protect them from the fallout as much as possible. I began to withdraw from Julia, creating distance between us as I prepared for the confrontation. Every time she touched me, every time she said she loved me, it felt like a dagger to my heart. But I stayed silent, biding my time, waiting for the right moment to lay everything on the table. When that moment came, I knew there would be no turning back. Julia had no idea that I knew. I watched her go about her days with a sense of normalcy that felt like a mockery of everything I was going through. She smiled, laughed, and kissed me goodnight, as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The trust one once had in her was gone, replaced by a cold determination to see this through. The private investigator's final report arrived a few days later. It was comprehensive, leaving no room for doubt. He had tracked her movements, documented her interactions with Adam, and even recorded their conversations when they thought no one was watching. The evidence was irrefutable. Julia wasn't just having an affair, she was living a double life. The most damning piece was an audio recording of a conversation between Julia and Adam. They talked about their weekend plans, laughed about how clueless I was, and even discussed ways to keep their affair hidden. Hearing her voice, so carefree and conspiratorial, broke something inside me. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. This was someone else entirely. I decided it was time to act. The first step was meeting with Jennifer Pratt, a divorce attorney recommended by the private investigator. Jennifer was sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely protective of her clients. She listened carefully as I laid out my situation, her expression hardening as I described Julia's betrayal. "You're doing the right thing," Jennifer said firmly. "We'll make sure you come out of this with everything you're entitled to, your home, custody of your kids, and a clean break from this woman." The thought of divorce was both liberating and terrifying. I had built my life around Julia, and the idea of starting over was daunting. But staying in a marriage built on lies was no longer an option. I had to think about Emma and Daniel, about the kind of example I wanted to set for them. They deserved better than this. Jennifer helped me put together a plan. We would gather all the necessary financial documents, secure evidence of Julia's infidelity, and file for divorce on grounds of adultery. It would be a clean break, as much as such a thing was possible. But before we filed, I wanted to confront Julia. I needed her to know that I knew, and I needed to see her reaction when the mask came off. The confrontation was carefully orchestrated. I waited until the kids were out of the house, spending the weekend with my parents. It was just the two of us in the living room, a bottle of wine open on the table. Julia was relaxed, her guard down, as we made small talk about work and the kids. Then I slid the envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked, her smile faltering as she picked it up. "Open it," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She hesitated, then pulled out the photos and the report. Her face turned pale as she flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with each new piece of evidence. By the time she reached the end, she was trembling. "Mark, I can explain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending there's an explanation for this. I know everything, Julia. Every lie, every trip, every moment you spent with him." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to turn off the oven. 12 years of betrayal isn't a mistake, Julia. It's a choice. 1,000 choices you made to lie to me, to betray me, to destroy our family." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I didn't want to lose you," she said. "I love you, Mark. Please, we can work through this. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Her words felt hollow, like a script she had rehearsed. "It's too late," I said. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." The look of shock on her face was almost satisfying. She had expected me to forgive her, to fight for our marriage, to let her off the hook. But I was done playing the fool. "Mark, please," she begged. "Think about the kids. Think about everything we've built together. Don't throw it all away." "You threw it away," I said coldly. "You threw it away the moment you decided Adam was more important than your family." She tried to argue, to plead her case, but I refused to listen. I had made up my mind, and nothing she said could change it. That night, Julia slept in the guest room. I couldn't bear to share the same bed with her. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence a stark reminder of what had been lost. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. This was the beginning of the end, and I was ready to face whatever came next. The days following our confrontation were a blur of tension and silence. Julia and I barely spoke, exchanging only the bare minimum of words necessary to manage the logistics of life. The kids returned from my parents' house, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the Cold War brewing between us. I did my best to shield them from the turmoil, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they sensed something was wrong. Julia had attempted to plead her case several times since that night. Each time, I shut her down with the same calm finality. "There's nothing to talk about," I'd say, and she would retreat, defeated but not entirely resigned. She was grasping at straws, trying to salvage something from the wreckage, but I had no intention of letting her manipulate her way out of this. I moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Jennifer guided me through every step, her sharp efficiency a source of reassurance. She was meticulous, ensuring we had every piece of evidence and documentation necessary to make the case airtight. Julia didn't know it yet, but the battle lines were being drawn, and I was prepared to fight for everything I held dear, especially Emma and Daniel. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some of our financial records, Julia appeared in the doorway of my home office. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. She looked like a shadow of the confident woman I once knew. "Mark, can we talk?" "Please," she said softly. I considered telling her to leave, but something in her voice made me pause. "What is it?" I asked, not looking up from the papers in front of me. She stepped into the room, clutching a tissue in her hands. I need to understand. Is there any chance at all for us to fix this? To rebuild what we had? I set the papers aside and leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze. Julia, you didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. For 12 years, you lived a lie. You lied to me, to our children, to everyone who believed in us. How do you come back from that? Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank into the chair across from me. I don't know, she admitted. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try. Therapy, counseling, anything. I can't lose you, Mark. I can't lose our family. Her desperation was palpable, but I couldn't ignore the bitterness in my heart. You already lost me, I said quietly. The moment you decided to put Adam above your family, you lost me. She broke down, her sobs filling the room. I watched her for a moment, torn between the man I used to be, the man who would have done anything to comfort her, and the man I was now, hardened by betrayal. I didn't reach out to her. Instead, I waited for her to compose herself. Mark, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling. But I'm begging you, for the sake of the kids, don't give up on us. The mention of Emma and Daniel struck a nerve. They were my world, the reason I was holding it together at all. But they were also the reason I couldn't stay. I couldn't let them grow up in a household built on lies and resentment. This isn't about forgiveness, I said. It's about what's best for the kids. And what's best for them is stability, honesty, and a father who isn't drowning in bitterness every time he looks at their mother. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded, defeated. I don't know what else to say, she whispered. There's nothing else to say, I replied. You made your choices, Julia. Now you have to live with the consequences. She left the room without another word, and I returned to the task at hand. It was easier to focus on the practicalities of the divorce than to dwell on the emotional devastation. Numbers, documents, and legal strategies were straightforward, devoid of the pain and betrayal that colored every interaction with Julia. The weeks dragged on as we moved through the process. Julia tried to fight for more time with the kids, but Jennifer was relentless. You have a strong case for primary custody, she assured me. Given her infidelity and the impact it's likely had on the family dynamic, the court will favor stability. And that stability is you. Julia's attempts to reconcile grew more desperate as the reality of the divorce set in. She wrote me letters, left notes on my desk, and even tried to rekindle some semblance of intimacy. But I remained steadfast. My decision was final, and no amount of pleading or manipulation would change that. The kids started to notice the strain. Emma, ever perceptive at 13, asked me one evening, Dad, is everything okay with you and Mom? I hesitated, searching for the right words. Things have been a little tough between us lately, I admitted. But no matter what happens, we both love you and Daniel very much. That will never change. Her brow furrowed, and she looked down at her plate. Are you getting a divorce? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. We're still figuring things out, I said carefully. But I promise, no matter what, we'll make sure you and your brother are okay. Emma nodded, her expression solemn. I just want us to be happy again, she said quietly. Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. They reinforced my resolve to see this through. Julia and I couldn't be happy together, not after everything that had happened. But I could give Emma and Daniel the stability and love they deserved, even if it meant doing it alone. The day I filed the divorce papers was both a relief and a heartbreak. It marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter one had once believed would last forever. As I handed the documents to Jennifer, I felt a strange mix of emotions, grief, anger, and a glimmer of hope for the future. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the life I had now. And I was determined to make it a good one for my children and for myself. The divorce proceedings were moving along steadily, and I could see the end in sight. The house, the custody arrangement, the finances, everything was falling into place. Julia, though heartbroken and resistant at first, had begun to accept the inevitable. She'd grown quieter, retreating into herself in a way I hadn't seen before. I attributed it to the guilt and the weight of her choices catching up to her. Emma and Daniel, on the other hand, were adjusting as best they could. They were resilient, even if the cracks were beginning to show. Daniel, my youngest, clung to me more often, asking questions about what life would look like once the divorce was finalized. Emma, ever the stoic, tried to mask her emotions but often retreated to her room in silence. I resolved to be strong for them, no matter how much I struggled with my own feelings. But life has a way of throwing you off balance just when you think you've regained your footing. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the call. I was at work, sifting through emails, when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made me pick up. "Mr. Collins?" the voice on the other end asked. "Yes, this is Mark," I replied cautiously. "This is Officer Reynolds from the County Police Department. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." My heart sank. "What is it?" I asked, my voice already trembling. "It's about your wife, Julia. There's been an accident." Time seemed to slow as the officer explained what had happened. Julia had been driving to meet with her lawyer that morning when her car veered off the road and into a ravine. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. She was gone. The words hit me like a freight train. Gone. The woman who had betrayed me, who had broken my heart, who I had spent months preparing to leave behind, was gone. Despite everything, I felt the air leave my lungs as the reality of her death sank in. The officer was saying something about arrangements, about notifying family, but I barely registered his words. I hung up and sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the news pressing down on me like a physical force. I don't remember much of the hours that followed. I left work without explanation and drove aimlessly through the city, my mind racing with memories of Julia. The good times, the bad, the love we once shared, and the betrayal that had unraveled it all. She was gone, and with her, the chance for closure, for answers, for anything that resembled resolution. Breaking the news to Emma and Daniel was the hardest thing I've ever done. They were still reeling from the upheaval of the divorce, and now this. Emma burst into tears, her composure crumbling as she clung to me. Daniel, too young to fully grasp the magnitude of what had happened, simply looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Why, Dad?" Emma sobbed. "Why did this have to happen?" I had no answers. How could I? Life wasn't fair, and it never had been. The funeral was a blur of condolences and shared grief. Julia's family was there, her friends, colleagues, people I hadn't seen in years. They spoke of her kindness, her warmth, the person she had been before everything fell apart. It was surreal, standing there as the grieving widower, knowing the truth of what had transpired between us. But in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. After the funeral, life settled into a strange, hollow routine. The kids and I tried to navigate our new normal, but the weight of Julia's absence hung over us like a shadow. Emma grew quieter, her once bright spirit dulled by the loss of her mother. Daniel, ever curious, asked questions I struggled to answer. "Where is Mom now? Does she miss us?" At night, when the house was silent and the kids were asleep, I found myself haunted by the what-ifs. What if I had tried harder to save our marriage? What if I had been more forgiving? What if I had been able to see past the betrayal to the woman I had once loved? One evening, as I was cleaning out Julia's belongings, I found a journal tucked away in the back of her closet. It was old, the leather cover worn and faded. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face whatever truths it might hold. The pages were filled with Julia's thoughts, her fears, and her regrets. She wrote about her love for me, about the choices she had made and how deeply she regretted them. In one entry, dated just weeks before her death, she wrote. "Mark, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I loved you. I still love you. I wish I could go back and undo the hurt I caused, but all I can do now is hope that one day you'll find peace, even if it's without me." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. For the first time since her death, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the woman she had become, but for the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had been my partner, my confidant, my everything. Life moved on, as it always does, but the scars remained. I poured my energy into Emma and Daniel, determined to give them the love and stability they needed. But there were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the ghost of Julia lingered in the corners of my mind, a bittersweet reminder of what was lost. In the end, I learned that grief isn't linear. It ebbs and flows, a constant undercurrent that shapes the way we move forward. Julia's betrayal had broken me, but her death taught me something far more profound, that love, even when tainted by pain, leaves an indelible mark. And while I could never go back, I could honor her memory by being the best father, the best man, I could be, for her, for our children, and for myself.